omahasteaks.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, TEEF, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teef.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Our book club book for today is Talk Radio's America by Brian Rosenwald, subtitled How an Industry Took Over a Political Party That Then Took Over the United States. This is from the introduction. August 1, 1988 marked the beginning of the long road to President Donald Trump. But even political junkies took little notice of the fateful events that unfolded that day as a failed disc jockey and former Kansas City Royals executive named Rush Hudson Limbaugh III made his national radio debut. Only a small audience tuned in. So poorly commemorated was the moment that we don't even know how many stations broadcast day one of Limbaugh's syndicated program. Limbaugh claims the show began on 56 affiliates, while other counts range from 57 and 87. From the beginning, the show was brash, entertaining, controversial, and boundary-pushing. Before Limbaugh, this sort of programming did not exist outside major cities. In 1983, there were just 59 talk radio stations nationwide, and the program on many of those stations consisted of advice shows, staged interviews, and caller-driven discussions of everything from neighborhood schools to abominable snowmen. Most talk radio programming focused on local concerns, and most of the industry's stars, such as Larry King and Jesse Raphael, had left-of-center views but rarely shared them. At the time of Limbaugh's national debut, talk radio had negligible political impact. In talk radio hotbeds such as Boston, hosts might influence local and statewide policy debates, especially on visceral issues such as seatbelt laws. But talk radio was not a partisan force, and it had no role in national politics. In fact, the wall-to-wall conservative political talk stations that dominate the AM airwaves today were impossible until 1987, thanks to a regulation called the Fairness Doctrine. That year, however, the Federal Communications Commission eliminated the policy, which required broadcasters of opinionated programming on controversial issues to offer an array of viewpoints. In this more permissive environment, Limbaugh would go on to revolutionize the radio business. In doing so, he helped unintentionally to spawn a major new political player. Within a decade, the broadcast format he inaugurated aired on more than 1,000 stations and kept millions company as they commuted, worked, and shouted back at their radios. It took just a few years before conservative talk radio began to influence national politics and public policy. That influence only grew throughout the decades as the business changed. Over the course of the 1990s and early 2000s, the number of nationally syndicated talk shows rose dramatically, and the content of talk radio programs became increasingly political and conservative. Liberal pundits and some scholars agree on the broad outlines of the story. Conservative station executives, conspiring with their Republican allies, built a format modeled on Limbaugh's program, and thousands of Limbaugh wannabes cropped up all over the country. Executives, hosts, and politicians turned talk radio into an appendage of the Republican Party, using the platform to get Republicans elected and advance the party's agenda. The success of talk radio led to the development of partisan and ideological cable news networks, and some hosts complemented their radio shows with primetime cable programs. Eventually, this content found a home in the new digital sphere, with equally strident cheerleaders proliferating on blogs and other online publications. This narrative makes sense, especially to liberals. After all, many conservative media executives and their corporate political action committees stick to Republican candidates, and most hosts champion conservative candidates and causes. But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two, But this narrative is wrong. In reality, the story of talk radio's emergence as a popular conservative format and the impact it had on American politics weaves together two distinct, complex tales. Neither has anything to do with the conspiracy to create a media servant of the Republican Party. The first describes how talk radio spread across America, in the process saving AM radio from financial ruin. Limbaugh had no intention of affecting elections or legislation, and no inkling that he could. Nor did any of his early successors. The executives who gave these hosts a chance also had no interest in political outcomes. Hosts and their bosses were in business. They wanted to captivate listeners and make money, and they discovered, essentially by accident, that conservative political talk in the mouth of an entertaining personality achieved this. Conservative hosts had strong opinions, but their primary goal was, and still is, financial gain. And it is because they realized financial gain that more and more stations invested in their style and content while divesting from competing formats. The second story concerns talk radio's transformation, after 1995, into an almost entirely conservative and doctrinaire medium that eventually spawned successors in other media, took over the Republican Party, and reshaped it in hosts' and listeners' image. Limbaugh was a great innovator, but he didn't change American media and politics all at once or on his own. In conservative talk radio's early days, hosts shared stations with liberal talkers and apolitical programs. There was not an immediate sense that conservative radio was the future either. But gradually, its success snowballed thanks to trial and error in the radio business, regulatory changes, political events, happenstance, and most importantly, listener behavior. Hosts also got a boost from marginalized conservative Republican politicians who realized that talk radio would enable them to circumnavigate the mainstream media, and deliver their message directly to voters. The book, Talk Radio's America.
The Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, wabbits. It's the first month. Happy September 1st. Happy Tuesday. We've got just an amazing show today. In our second hour, John Dean is going to drop by, the guy who basically spilled the beans on Richard Nixon and used to be Nixon's lawyer as White House counsel. He had the job that Don McGahn had. And he's got a new book out called Authoritarian Nightmare. We're going to be discussing that. John Dean used to be a fairly regular face on this, or voice on this program. In our third hour, Ellie Zupnik is going to drop by about Big Pharma. And we're going to, just some absolutely shocking information coming out about Big Pharma. We'll get into that in our third hour. But here in this first hour, there's a couple of questions that I wanted to get into. Number one, why are so many Americans willing to support hate and division? And I mean this as a serious question. It's not just a throwaway. I'll get into some detail here. Donald Trump has told us now, yesterday he tweeted, only 9,000 Americans have died from coronavirus. Right? Everybody else had a pre-existing condition. They were old, they were overweight, they had diabetes, they had heart disease, they had asthma, whatever it may be. And therefore, only 9,000 people have died of coronavirus. He also told us that shooting an unarmed man in the back 7 times is the same thing as having a bad putt at golf. He told us that protests around America against his policies and against racism are actually being led by an airplane full of black-jacketed thugs. Thugs, the word that Trump has used most of his life to describe black people.
And he refused to condemn a vicious murderer who killed 2 people and blew the arm off a third. While, crying crocodile tears off another guy who got killed here in Portland, a right-winger apparently shot by a left-winger. But when left-wingers get shot by right-wingers, oh, well, that's self-defense. That's just fine. And now he's threatening the mayor of Portland with federal troops again, which raises the question, is this the America that America, that the majority of voters want to live in? Or even a substantial minority? I mean, a country where the police act as an occupying force and are relatively immune to oversight or discipline? A president who pits people against each other based on their religion or on the color of their skin? An administration that lies about science as about 200,000 Americans die? Corrupt former lobbyists in charge of virtually every federal agency? Cutting the Social Security tax so that the entire program collapses in the next 3 years? Is this what America wants? Well, if the polls are any indication, about half of Americans actually are right there with him. Why would that be? I mean, is the racism so deeply ingrained in the white community in America that white people will regularly turn out to vote for politicians who use racial dog whistles? Seems so. I mean, it certainly worked for Republican candidates ever since Richard Nixon in 1968 with his Southern strategy. That was the direct result of the 1964-1965 passage of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. When Lyndon Johnson confided in Bill Moyers, his press aide at the time, that by signing those pieces of legislation, he worried that the Democratic Party might have lost the South for a generation. Well, it's been 4 generations since then, maybe 3. And yeah, white people are still voting race hugely. The main subtext of Donald Trump's sales pitch and of the entire Republican convention, and I kept, Louise and I watched this together, and I kept, there they go again. They're going to move into your suburban neighborhood. Those black people, those brown people, they're going to move into your suburban neighborhood. I will stop them. That was the message. The Republican Party will stop them. Mitch McConnell will stop them. Don't worry, your property values aren't going to go down. You see, those are the 2 big memes, right? Black people are going to move into your neighborhood and burglarize your house and rape your wife and daughter, or black people are going to move into your neighborhood and your housing values are going to go down. And this is the Republican sales pitch. And it looks like somewhere in the neighborhood of half of America. In Texas, it's 50-50. In Ohio, it's 50-50 right now between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. Half of Americans are like, yeah, that's our biggest fear. COVID, well, not so much. The economy going in the town, well, what can you say? And then there's a second topic here, and it's one we're going to dig into more deeply in the second hour with John Dean, and that is that as our nation sinks deeper and deeper into poverty, and make no mistake about it, that's exactly what's been happening for 40 years. As this nation sinks deeper and deeper into poverty, before the COVID crisis and the Trump recession actually started in February, before COVID, when we had only 5 cases here in the United States or something like that. That's when our country went into recession. It was the end of, the longest expansion in history, frankly. It was perfectly expected. But back then, only 40% of American families could deal with a $400 expense, and only 30 or 35% of American families could deal with a $1,000 unexpected expense. I'm guessing right now that number is probably more like 15 or 20% of Americans who could deal with that. And what happens is, as people lose their economic security, as they lose their job safety, they become, frankly, more vulnerable to an authoritarian message. I mean, there's all kinds of studies that show that more authoritarian, top of that list. I mean, a few months ago, one of the big stories, I talked about it here on this program. You and I talked, we all talked about it, that a substantial percentage, and I'm sorry I don't have the study right in front of me, so I can't give you the exact number, but it was in the 40% range. Think that if the military were to take over this country, it would be an okay thing or maybe even a good thing. Now, historically, when people were asked that question, the number of people who said yes was around 5, 10, 15%. In the same neighborhood of people who think that the second coming is next week and UFOs are actually running the White House. So you've got this poll, also another one that basically this is about as police state authoritarian as you can get. The military taking over the country, or could it be both? Racism and authoritarianism. I mean, that right-wing media like Fox News and hate radio have so succeeded in selling racial fear so effectively to white people that even modest racist inclinations among some white people are enough to tip them into embracing violence and authoritarianism. And right now, nobody knows the answer. Why is it? I mean, there is this is from Psychology Today. Trump followers show 5 traits: authoritarian personality syndrome, social dominance orientation. That's where you want to be part of a group that is viewed as the group on top. Prejudice. I mean, this goes back to Nixon's Southern strategy. A lack of contact with other groups. In other words, in fact, studies have shown Trump's white supporters have significantly less contact with minorities than other Americans. And what's called relative deprivation. It means I feel like I'm not getting my share of what I'm entitled to. And of course, the irony here is that who killed the middle class? Ronald Reagan and the Republican Party. Anyhow, we'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And when we come back, I want to amplify that and then ask the question, should Wendy Rittenhouse, Kyle's mother, be arrested for arming her child with a gun and driving him across state lines to a protest? And welcome back. Dave in New London, New Hampshire. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Do you listen to Ralph Nader's show on the weekend?
I listened to his podcast.
Yeah, I guess it's the same thing. So anyway, that's a great show.
Yeah.
Do you listen
I don't know
to
if it's the same thing or not, but
do you listen to On Point? It's out
occasionally. What's the whole point of this, Dave? Why are you asking these questions?
Well, I just wanted to kind of give a plug for the Ralph thing. But last week at the end of
Ralph's podcast is great.
Yeah. Last week you had some woman on the show, and it was your last caller, and she was going on and on and on about the crazy stuff, and you were kind of befuddled, didn't know what to do with her. And I thought to myself, why did and this happens on NPR too, people that call in, why are these people listening to what they would consider left-wing stuff? Why do they listen? Why do they even bother? Aren't they kind of instructed not to? So that's one thing. The second thing is, I saw you mentioned Don McGahn. I saw. Well,
let me just answer your question, Dave. I've been doing this for a while, and my sense of it is that most of those people who call in, most of the conservatives who call in to challenge me, and probably that seemingly rather elderly woman who called and was just spewing Fox points, have just basically stumbled across the channel, whether it's on Free Speech TV or YouTube or Sirius XM or on a local radio station. They've just stumbled across it. They heard something that provoked them. They called in. There are a couple conservatives who call sort of regularly, but most of them have kind of fallen away. I think that increasingly people are just moving into their silos. Back to you.
Yeah. I'm going to skip the Don McGahn thing and throw something else at you then, which is how do you get on to, how can you, your show, get into places that aren't here? Like there was someone who called you from Phoenix, and he said, at the end of his call, he said, "Tom, you got to get down here. We don't have any voices like yours down here." And it's true. People just aren't hearing anything on the other side. All they're hearing.
Well,
is
there's some pushback, and it's starting to move into the mainstream media, Dave. But I'm not going to turn this into a complaint fest about what stations we're on or not on. I mean, it's just basically something that it is what it is, shall we say. We just have 30 seconds. Jessica, I'm sorry. I'll pick your call up in a little bit. But Joyce on line 4, I just about put Jessica on the air, but then Sean said you got 30 seconds. This, to the point that I was speaking about earlier, the Oath Keepers. They're saying civil war is here right now, and they want a war in the streets. These guys, this is one of the leaders of this movement. He tweeted that Donald Trump needs to declare a national emergency and an insurrection in Portland. It's incredible. We'll get to this in just a second, so stick around. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Daily rants and weekly op-eds at HartmannReport.com. It's free and there's no ads. HartmannReport.com. History of monopolies, how big business destroyed the American dream. I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let me just fill in the blanks here. First of all, Wendy Rittenhouse, Kyle Rittenhouse is this 17-year-old who was driven from from suburban or whatever, small town Antioch, Illinois, all the way up to Kenosha, Wisconsin, with his AR-15 in the car, and then mom drops him off at the riot or at the protest or whatever you want to call it, and he kills 2 people and blows the arm off a third. And his lawyer, guy by the name of John Pierce of Pierce Bainbridge, is arguing, according to this piece in Daily Kos by Aniel. Well, here's what it says. Rittenhouse's attorney, John Pierce of Pierce Bainbridge, plans to fight the underage weapons possession charge, arguing that at 17, his client could be part of the well-regulated militia mentioned in the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Which raises 2 questions. The first, should Wendy Rittenhouse be arrested and prosecuted as an accomplice to murder for driving her son 20 miles with his AR-15 and we don't know yet, but how he acquired. It's illegal for a 17-year-old to own a weapon like this or any kind of gun in both Illinois and Wisconsin. So did she buy the gun for him? and then drive. I mean, what the hell is going on with Mom here? Inquiring minds would like to know. But this defense that he's going to mount, according to his lawyer, that he's a member of a well-regulated militia. You recall the Second Amendment, which was written back in the day, and this was my first book in the Hidden History series, The Hidden History of Guns and the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment was written the way it was, when it was, in part to provide an alternative to a standing army during time of peace. That was the original rationale for it, and the thing that Jefferson and Madison had been pushing really, really hard for. And they were joined in that by Hamilton and Paine and other, anti-slavery, not slave owner types. But principally at the time and on the date, or in that year, that the Second Amendment was finally written and edited to say a state rather than a nation, it was specifically to protect the slave patrols in Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia. Those were the states that said basically in the ratifying conventions in 1788 and 1789, they, where public figures like Patrick Henry came out and very loudly said, if you don't protect our slave patrols, then we're not signing this Constitution. We're not joining the Union. So, is that going to be his defense? Well, then it goes on from there. David Newart, writing for the Daily Kos here about Donald Trump in Portland. And now we've got the Oath Keepers, which is this group of sheriffs around the country, largely, who are keeping their oath that basically they are the supreme law enforcement officers. And their leader, a guy by the name of Stuart Rhodes, tweeted day before yesterday, "The first shot has been fired, brother. Civil war is here right now. We'll give Trump one last chance to declare this a Marxist insurrection and suppress it as his duty demands. If he fails to do his duty, we will do ours." Now, let me just remind you that in Pastor Niemöller's famous poem, he starts out, first they came for the trade unionists. The first war that Adolf Hitler declared was against Marxists. Right-wing actor James Woods tweeted, "This is civil war now. Democrats are fine with conservatives being murdered for wearing a hat they don't like. They're going to keep attacking law-abiding citizens in frenzied mobs until they're dealt with the same way all bullies finally are." Over at the New Republic, Casey Michael wrote, "They confirm that in the end, America's militia movement is little more than the heir to the white vigilantes that preceded it, the white rifle clubs and night riders terrorizing black Americans, the settler colonial vigilante groups leading America's ethnic cleansing campaigns across the American West. I would add to that the Klan." And then he goes on to say, "These supposed oath keepers are now fascist for a would-be American duce. Black shirt shock troops in the campaign to maintain the nation's racial hierarchy, no matter how much bloodshed that goal requires." And here we've got, another tweet here or a post actually on Facebook from Rhodes. "President Trump must declare that there to be a Marxist insurrection. He needs to declare that Marxist insurrection to be nationwide, carried out by Antifa and Black Lives Matter, with the goal of terrorizing Americans into submission. Trump has both the power and the duty to call the militia into federal service to suppress this rebellion." He's not talking about the National Guard.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And Kyle Rittenhouse's defense is apparently going to be that he was part of that militia. The old slave patrols reincarnated.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner, a memoir. This is from chapter 17, about a little more than a third of the way into the book. At first, the revolution only gave the impression of being an historical event like any other, a matter for the press that might just possibly have some effect on the public mood. The Nazis celebrate January 30th as their day of revolution. They are wrong. There was no revolution on January 30th, 1933, just a change of government. Hitler became chancellor, by no means the Führer of the Nazi regime. The cabinet contained only 2 Nazis apart from him. He swore an oath of allegiance to the Weimar Constitution. The general opinion was that it was not the Nazis who had won, but the bourgeois parties of the right, who had captured, in quotes, the Nazis and held all the key positions in the government. In constitutional terms, events had taken a much more conventional, unrevolutionary course than most of what had happened during the previous 6 months. Outwardly also, the day had no revolutionary aspects, unless one considers a Nazi torchlight procession through Wilhelmstrasse or a minor gunfight in the suburbs that night as signs of a revolution. For most of us outsiders, the experience of January 30th, 1933 was that of reading the papers and the emotions we felt while we were doing so. The morning headline was, "Hitler called to president." That produced a certain nervous, impotent irritation. Hitler had been called to the president in August and November. He had been offered the vice-chancellorship and then the chancellorship. Both times he had set impossible conditions, and both times there had been solemn declarations, "Never again." Each time, "never again" had lasted exactly 3 months. Hitler's opponents in Germany at that time suffered from a compulsive urge to offer him everything he wanted, indefatigably, and at an even cheaper price, indeed to press it upon him. It's the same now with his opponents outside Germany. Again and again, this appeasement was formally renounced, and again it gaily reappeared at the crucial moment. Just so today. Then, as now, one's only hope was Hitler's own unreasonableness. Would it not sooner or later exhaust the patience of his opponents? Then, as now, it became apparent that their patience knew no bounds. At midday, the headline said, "Hitler makes impossible demands." We nodded, half reassured. It was only too credible. It would have gone against his nature to ask for less than too much. Perhaps the cup had once more passed from us. Hitler, the last defense against Hitler. At about 5 o'clock, the evening papers arrived. Cabinet of National Unity formed Hitler Reichschancellor. I don't know what the general reaction was. For about a minute, mine was completely correct. Icy horror. Certainly this had been a possibility for a long time. You had to reckon with it. Nevertheless, it was so bizarre, so incredible to read it now in black and white. Hitler, Reichschancellor. For a moment, I physically sensed the man's odor of blood and filth, the nauseating approach of a man-eating animal, its foul, sharp claws in my face. Then I shook the sensation off, tried to smile, started to consider, and found many reasons for reassurance. That evening, I discussed the prospects of the new government with my father. We agreed it had a good chance of doing a lot of damage, but not much chance of surviving very long. A deeply reactionary government with Hitler as its mouthpiece. Apart from this, it did not really differ much from the 2 governments that had succeeded Brüning's. Even with the Nazis, it would not have a majority in the Reichstag. Of course, that could always be dissolved, but the government had a clear majority of the population against it, in particular the working class, which would probably go communist now that the Social Democrats had completely discredited themselves. One could prohibit the communists, but that would only make them more dangerous. In the meantime, the government would be likely to implement reactionary social and cultural measures with some anti-Semitic additions to please Hitler. That would not attract any of its opponents to its side. Foreign policy would probably be a matter of banging the table. There might be an attempt to rearm. That would automatically add the outside world to the 60% of the home population who were against the Hitler government. Besides, who were the people who had suddenly started voting Nazi in the last 3 years? Misguided ignoramuses, for the most part, victims of propaganda, a fluctuating mass that would fall apart at the first disappointment. No, all things considered, this government was not a cause for alarm. The only question was what would come after it. It was possible that they would drive the country to civil war. The communists were capable of going on the attack before a prohibition against them came into force. The next day, this turned out to be the general opinion of the intelligent press. It is curious how plausible an argument it is, even today, when we know what came next? How could things turn out so completely different? Perhaps it was just because we were all so certain that they could not do so and relied on that with far too much confidence. So we neglected to consider that it might, if worse came to worse, be necessary to prevent the disaster from happening. Through the whole of February 1933, everything that happened remained a matter for the press. In other words, it took place in an arena that would lose all reality for 99% of the population the moment there were no newspapers. Admittedly, enough occurred in that arena. The Reichstag was dissolved. Then, in a flagrant breach of the Constitution, Hindenburg also dissolved the Prussian regional parliament. There were fast and furious changes of personnel in the civil service. The book defined Hitler.
It's wiped by Bob Ney.
In the science revolution this week, is Trump burying the pandemic, and will it work? Dr. Michael Mann is here about the Greenland ice sheet losing 1 million tons a minute. He'll explain what that means to us. Dr. Michael Greger drops by, and one of the most important questions right now, what can be done to stop the spread of animal-derived diseases? And director Dan Partland is here on his new film, Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 34 minutes past the hour. The place where despair is not an option. Leonard in Pasadena, California. Hey, Leonard, what's on your mind today?
Racism is a business model. It's not white people. It's greedy people. Money is their god. Greed is their religion. You know, they started this when they first came over here, attacking everybody and just saying they're inferior. Now I get to take your stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't explicitly disagree with that. I mean, this country was built on racism. We were built on the largest genocide in the history of the world, and then we began slavery. I mean, it's just, I mean, we didn't begin it, obviously, but we brought it to these shores. Jared in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I want to talk about Trump's recent comments with an interview with one of the blondes from Fox News. I don't really care their names. They're all pretty much the same person. And she was interviewing him and basically asked him, like, okay, I forget what the question was, but basically you're talking about, the protest. And she said, well, who's leading the protest? And he says, it's somebody we've apparently never heard of. Or was it leading Biden? I don't know. One or the other. But somebody we've never heard of.
It was both. Yeah. He's alleging that these folks are guiding, control Joe Biden. I think control was his word, and that they're leading the protests, and they're a bunch of thugs, which is Trump's word for black people, who fly around on airplanes all dressed in black. Now, if I was a thug flying around the country to lead protests, I don't think I'd be, along with a bunch of my buddies, I don't think that we would all be dressed in black to get on a commercial airplane. I mean, that's a great way to get security called on you. And I mean, these are fantasies, Jared. He's just living in this racist, paranoid fantasy world. That specific meme is running off a several-month-old post on Facebook that went viral, where this guy posted this thing saying that these thugs on airplanes are, well, here it is, actually. This is, let's see here. Here we go. A man from, this guy says, this is on Facebook, quote, at least a dozen males got off the plane in Boise from Seattle dressed from head to toe in black. Be ready for attacks downtown in residential areas. One of these passengers had a tattoo on his arm that said Antifa. And this is the kind of stuff. I mean, we had a bunch of these so-called Proud Boys show, or actually they call themselves Proud Boys, show up in a small town here in Oregon a month or so ago, because somebody on Facebook had posted this thing saying, Antifa's coming to your town. There's hundreds of black people coming in a bus. And they, all these guys were downtown and with guns. And nobody showed up. It turns out the post came from Russia or something. I mean, they were just being played. And whoever's provoking this, Jared, is playing Trump as much as anybody else. And it's very distressing. Jared, thank you for the call. Arlene in Denver. Hey, Arlene, what's up?
Good morning. I just had to call in. If Trump gets in again, I'm not calling him my president because I don't feel that way. But if he gets in again, I may have to leave the country. I really can't take it. It is hurting my everything. I'm a Christian. I'm African American. I'm 57 years old. I'm a veteran, and nothing he stands for is aligned with any of that. I just don't understand why they can't see it. I never understood that the hatred was this deep or this ingrained in some people. I just do not get it. So, I just wish you could speak to that because
Sure.
I don't know what else to do on it.
Yeah, well, number one, I think the hatred part of it in the white community, a racial hatred like that, is a very, very small slice. The 3%ers, the Proud Boys, the Patriot Prayer people, the people who are motivated principally, it appears, by racial hatred, are probably less than a fraction of 1%. But I think that probably white people who are walking around with hate in their hearts is probably 10%, 20% of the white population. But there's that other 30, 40, 50% for whom it's like, oh, I just don't know those people that well, those people in quotes. I'm uncomfortable. I'd rather be with my own people, that kind of stuff, right? Which has been basically the soft racism that has been driving all of this forever. And that's what Nixon tapped into. And that's what Trump is trying to tap into, although he's using the bazooka of hate to get there. But with regard to leaving the country, Arlene, did you see what Canada did? About 3 weeks ago, there was an American who drove up to Canada, somehow avoided the border, because we've got a huge border. It's easy to sneak through the woods. This guy apparently took a logging trail through the forest, ended up in Canada, was staying with some friends in Canada. The police came and got him. He's in jail right now. He's looking at a 6-month jail term, and I think it was a $100,000 fine, some massive fine for being in the country illegally in Canada. I mean, they're going after Americans right now. Where are you going to go?
Honestly, if I were to leave the country, it'd be someplace like Ghana. It wouldn't be to another white country. Honestly.
Yeah, I get it.
It just wouldn't.
Does Ghana have an open immigration policy?
Yes, they do. They've opened African Americans with open arms. And I never thought I would ever in my life say this because I love America. I fought for America. Yeah. But I can't. Not anymore. I just can't.
Yeah. So Ghana is becoming like the African American Israel.
Yeah, exactly. I have friends who've already moved there.
Yeah. Remarkable. Well, Arlene, let us hope that it doesn't come to that. I would miss you. And I know that your sentiment, by the way, is not, you're not the only one feeling this way. And people of all races, people of all, fill in the blank, just Americans across the board are watching what's going on and saying, if he gets reelected, things are going to change radically, rapidly for the worst, and I'm not sure I want to be a part of it.
Exactly.
This is an absolutely scary time. Arlene, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. Let's see here. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
Well, I was really hoping that I would follow Arlene because I got to tell you something, but this isn't new to me. I have, since I was in my 20s and graduated from college, said to myself that I do not want to die in the United States. To me, as a black man, or this type of black man, it would be like dying in prison because of the unique way that we came here. Unlike any other Americans, we did not have a choice. And I've had a conversation with you some years ago as to whether or not black people are really Americans. And if we are, we're vastly different than others. But that's not why I wanted to call. But I was struck by her commentary. And if the opportunity presents itself before I take my last gasp of air. I want to get the hell out of the United States. I do not love the United States. I don't loathe her either, but I don't see any reason that is logical why I would. I wanted to say to you, you'd spoken about this kid that Rittenhouse, is that his name?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, Tom, that all of these protests, or much of this protest, is about the killings of unarmed black people, whether it be Breonna Taylor or George Floyd or Mr. Blake. And it's funny that all the killings seem to be done by armed white guys, or whatever side of the fence they're on, whether it's Portland or this guy. And you know, it's really weird. And this kid, Rittenhouse, he walked down the street with a gun, and the cops gave him water. It reminds me of Dylan Roof, who went into a black church and slaughtered 9 black people and was taken to Burger King. You know, I don't know who this conversation is between. I think maybe it's just between white people, because it's very clear what's going on in this country to me. How can you have such a disparity? And as far as Donald Trump, as I mentioned to you before, fear, white people's fear will always work. It will always work. When you spoke at the beginning of your program, you talked about Trump and kind of fomenting this. These black people are going to come into your neighborhoods. These black people are going to. You didn't say, and I'm not criticizing you. You were absolutely right. That is the sentiment. But the thing is it's not these Mexican people or these Asian people. No, it's these black people. And I have to remind white America that your black problem is a self-inflicted wound, because you could have left us where we were.
Yeah, I get it. But that was 400 years ago, and this is now. And so I think, you know, we really need to be talking, Kenyatta, about what we're going to do now.
We talk about, Tom, you talk about...
I'm moving to Norway and you moving to Ghana. There's no solution. Yeah. Well, yeah, you're right. Kenyatta, I'm out of time here. But, you know, thank you for the call. And as always, your thoughtful and insightful comments. It was nice to hear from you. And I look forward to the next piece you publish over at Op-Ed News. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Occupying the media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. We're right here. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So I'm just wondering why Wendy Rittenhouse isn't in jail. I think if I drove one of my kids to a crime and helped him perpetrate it, and welcome back. Let's see here. John in Seattle. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
No, thanks, Tom. Well, following on your last caller, I'm a white person who's afraid, but I'm afraid of Trump, and just wanted to ask your thoughts on whether he's doing this on purpose so he can foment violence and give himself and good old Bill Barr a chance to declare a national emergency and instate martial law.
Of course he is. The national emergency, martial law, suspend elections, clamp down on America part, wouldn't surprise me if he could make it happen. But I think that his equation is very simple. If he can get a lot of, in particular, black people in the streets acting badly, burning buildings and things, if he can get that to happen, he wins. Look at the imagery that he's using in his advertising. Look at watch Fox News for an hour sometime in the evening and look at the video that they're using. And you will just totally get it, John, that this is, there's a reason why in the past, whether it was the riots in the late 70s, whether it was, or the late 60s or the early 70s, or after Rodney King in the 90s, as I recall, fill in the blank, right? There's a reason why every president, including Republican presidents, by and large, in the past, when we've had a national crisis like this, as the as black people have said, enough to white racism and violence directed against them, that every past president has tried to essentially heal America, has made some effort, at least a rhetorical effort, to pull people together. Arguably with the exception of Richard Nixon, although even as president, Richard Nixon said the right things. It was just his campaign, his advertising campaigns used those images. And the same with George Herbert Walker Bush. He spoke very high-minded, and then he had Lee Atwater go out with the Billy Horton ad. But basically, prior to Trump, presidents have seen their job as leaving this country intact, bringing us together. And I'm convinced that he thinks that the only way he's going to avoid going to prison in 6 months is to tear this country, is to set this country on fire.
Yeah, as you've said in the past, I think quoting a Doonesbury character, never bet against a caged rat with nothing to lose if he goes abnormal.
And that's exactly what's going on. This guy, Donald Trump, and many of the people around him. I mean, his director of Homeland Security his national security advisor has committed crimes. He's got a whole bunch of people in my opinion, Bill Barr has committed crimes. He's got a whole bunch of people in positions of power around him who are either complicit in his crimes in a way that could near legal responsibility to them, or have committed their own crimes. And, they're all as scared as he is that he gets thrown out of office and somebody comes in and says, we're going to start holding people accountable. And, that fear of normalcy, the fear of what, who's going to go to jail if things go to normal, is driving things, frankly, as much as, yes, dear leader. We'll be right back. The Hidden History of Monopoly tells how Robert Bork, that guy from the Reagan era, transformed corporate America and destroyed the American dream. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly. Remember the Boston Tea Party? To the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Welcome back. John in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, John, what's up?
Hey, nice to talk to you, Tom. I'd like to talk about a sensitive subject, and it is about black people really arming themselves. I spoke to your call screener. This is nothing new. This pattern that the right wing likes to call isolated incidents have been happening way too often. And I am a follower of Martin and Malcolm. As I told you, screener, it could be Martin. But right now, with these right-wing vigilantes just pulling guns on people just jogging or picnicking at the park or riding their bikes. There's an article in Raw Story today where an 11-year-old girl was attacked with knocked upside the head with by a Trump supporter, a right-wing bully. She's lying in the hospital with a concussion right now because she said black is beautiful. All right?
I saw it. I read the article.
Right. I have not owned a gun in 40 years. All right? I don't go walking through white people's neighborhoods carrying a gun. But it seems now these guys are doing this with impunity on us. And
with enthusiasm.
Yes, very much so. And this is for me, because normally I am a person, like I said, I haven't owned a gun in 40 years. But I'd be damned if I'm going to be Trayvon Martin. I'll be damned if I'm going to be going into my own house and have a gun pulled on me. And this is the sad state of America. I can't even go to an NRA gun range to practice because they got the Confederate flag and pictures of black people that they take their, target practice with. So I'm finding one here in Missouri that is owned by black gun range owners. I've been looking into this now, and it really saddens me that it has come to this point. Me, really a pacifist now, don't get me wrong. I served in the military. I'm a sharpshooter. Really, I'm not a marksman. I'm a sharpshooter. I can pick you off at 500 yards. But these vigilantes need to understand the Second Amendment of rights does not just belong to them. I will defend my home. I will not be Trayvon Martin. You're not going to be questioning me going into my own house and pulling a gun on me.
Yeah, I totally get it, John. And this is a debate or a discussion that I know for a fact, because I've been involved in it, is happening in a lot of homes, white and black and Hispanic and whatnot, all across America right now. Which is, okay, if we bring a gun into the house, we have increased by 500% the probability that somebody in this house will commit suicide using that gun, and we have doubled the probability that somebody will be wounded or killed accidentally by that gun. Okay, is that risk worth the threat of right-wing vigilantes, stopping me in the street? Of course, that would require, in most states, a concealed carry permit, but they're not impossible to get. Stopping me in the street and trying to kill me, is that worth the risk of right-wing vigilantes showing up at my home, et cetera? I mean, it's like this is a real tough one, John, for a lot of people, and most of the people I think who are having that conversation, and this is have that very high risk of bad outcomes if they have a gun in the home, which probably for you, as somebody who has a lot of experience with firearms, it's a much lower risk. But you understand what I'm saying here?
Of course. I do understand exactly what you're saying. But to me, the risk is I don't want to be a painted mural on somebody's building because I've wound up like Ahmaud Arbery or so many unarmed black men. And that's a real thing that I have to deal with. Pretty much. I'm not afraid. I'm not going to be afraid to go out of my house because I'm a black man. No, the days of those days are over. And this is what some white Americans need to understand. The days of you rolling around in your pickup trucks and doing what you want like you used to do in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, just like we just saw in Portland, right? All these pickup truck waving, flag waving guys with their guns and shooting people. What's different today than those days from the 60s or from the 50s or 40s?
Or those days in the 1870s when they were on horseback and they were carrying American and Dixie flags, only wearing white hoods.
Exactly. So at least now, I used to live in Washington State. Now I live in the state of Missouri. And everything, people who aren't familiar with the Northwest, it's a different way of racism up there. At least here in Missouri, they stand out. I mean, at least I do appreciate that. I do appreciate that because, they let me know where they're coming from.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. John, I'm checking out of this debate because I see both sides of it, and I cannot advise somebody one way or the other. And that's a very different position for me than just 6 months ago. But I completely understand what you're saying. Keep us up to date on how you're doing, John. Thanks a lot for the call, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. We'll be right back with John Dean about authoritarianism.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Omaha Steaks, gourmet you can trust. More information at omahasteaks.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, TEEF, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teef.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today we're reading from Dorfman and Mallart's book, How to Read Donald Duck, Imperialist Ideology in the Disney Comic. And this is from the preface to the English edition. This book was first published in Spanish. To say that this book was burnt in Chile should not come as a surprise to anyone. Hundreds of books were destroyed and thousands more prohibited and censored. It was written in the middle of 1971, in the middle of the Chilean revolutionary process. Copper had been rescued, the land was being returned to the peasantry, the whole Chilean people were recovering the industries that during the 20th century had been the means of enrichment for Mr. Rockefeller, Grace, Guggenheim, and Morgan. Because this process was intolerable to the United States government and its multinational corporations, it had to be stopped. They organized a plan which at the time was suspected and since has been confirmed by Mr. Kissinger, Ford, and Colby to have been directed and financed by the United States intelligence services. Their objective was to overthrow the constitutional government of Chile. To realize their objective, an invisible blockade was imposed. Credits were denied, spare parts purchased for industrial machinery were not sent, and later the Chilean state bank accounts in the U.S. were blocked, and an embargo preventing the sale of Chilean copper throughout the world was organized. There were, however, two items which were not blocked: planes, tanks, ships, and technical assistance for the Chilean armed forces, and magazines, TV serials, advertising, and public opinion polls for the Chilean mass media, which continued for the most part to be in the hands of a small group which was losing its privileges. To maintain them with those of the U.S., their media prepared the climate for the bourgeois insurrection, which finally materialized some years later on the 11th of September, 1973. Each day, with expert U.S. advice, in each newspaper, each weekly, each monthly magazine, each news dispatch, each movie, and each comic book, their arsenal of psychological warfare was fortified. In the words of General Pinochet, the point was, quote, to conquer the minds, end quote, while in the words of Donald Duck in the magazine Dislandia, published in December 1971, coinciding with the first mass rallies of native fascism, the so-called March of the Empty Pots and Pans, the point was to, quote, restore the king. But the people did not want the restoration of the king, nor of the businessman. The popular Chilean cultural offensive, which accompanied the social and economic liberation, took multiple forms: wall paintings, popular papers, TV programs, motion pictures, theater, songs, literature. In all areas of human activity, with differing degrees of intensity, the people expressed their will. Perhaps the most important arm of this offensive was the work of the state publishing house, Quimantu, a word meaning sunshine of knowledge in the language of the Chilean Mapuche Indians. In 2.5 years, it published 5 million books, twice the amount that had been published in all of Chile during the previous 70 years. In addition, it transformed the content of some of the magazines it had inherited from before the Popular Unity government and created new ones. It is in this multifaceted context, with the people on the march to cultural liberation, a process which also meant criticizing the mass cultural merchandise exported so profitably by the U.S. into the Third World, that How to Read Donald Duck was generated. We simply answered a practical need. It was not an academic exercise. For the Mad Dog Warriors on that September 11th, there were no paintings on the walls. There were only enormous stains which dirtied the city in memory. They, using the fascist youth brigades, whitewashed all the signing, many-colored walls of the nation. They broke records, murdered singers, destroyed radios and printing presses, imprisoned and executed journalists, so that nothing would be left to remind anybody of anything about the struggle for national liberation. But it was not enough to clean these cultural stains from the street. The most important task was to eliminate all those who bore the stain inside themselves, the fighters, workers, peasants, employees, students, and patriotic soldiers, to eliminate these creators of a new life, to eliminate this new life which grew, and for all that we created. This book, conceived for the Chilean people and our urgent needs, produced in the midst of our struggle, is now being published far from Chile in the uncle land of Disney, behind the barbed wire network of ITT. Mr. Disney, we are returning your duck, feathers plucked and well roasted. Look inside, you can see the handwriting on the wall, our hands still writing on the wall, Donald, to go home. This is written in 1975. And then this from David Kunzel's introduction. The names of the presidents change. That of Disney remains. 46 years after the birth of Mickey Mouse, 8 years after the death of his master, Disney's may be the most widely known North American name in the world. He is arguably the century's most important figure in bourgeois popular culture. He has done more than any single person to disseminate around the world certain myths upon which that culture has thrived, notably that of an innocence, supposedly universal, beyond place, beyond time, and beyond criticism. The myth of U.S. political innocence is at last being dismantled, and the reality which it masks lies in significant areas exposed to public view. But the great American dream of cultural innocence still holds a global imagination in thrall. The first major breach into the Disney of this dream was made by Richard Schickel's The Disney Version, The Lifetimes and Commerce of Walt Disney, the book How to Read Donald Duck.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In our first hour, we were asking the question, are Trump's supporters principally driven by racism or authoritarianism? We spent most of the hour talking about racism. Let's examine the authoritarian side of that. John Dean knows something about authoritarian presidents. He was the White House counsel to Richard Nixon. He's got a new book out, Authoritarian Nightmare. It's absolutely extraordinary. He's with us today. It's been a while since he's been on the program. John, welcome back to the program, and so glad to have you. I'm curious your thoughts about the correlation or the relationship between Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. Both. Their personal embrace of authoritarianism, their personal embrace of racism, their public embrace of both those things, and to what extent Nixon set up Trump's presidency.
Well, it's been a good run since Nixon, so I don't see that as certainly any kind of immediate precursor. But Nixon is clearly part of a trend in the Republican Party where racism became a core issue. It starts after Goldwater in '64 when he discovers that because of the actions of Lyndon Johnson on the civil rights legislation, he had really run the Southern Democrats out of the Democratic Party, and they were more than welcome in the Republican Party. and they brought with them their racism, which has never really been fully dissipated or removed. It's quite striking. It's, the original sin has been carried down generation after generation. So yes, Nixon did carry racism forward. He was not a blatant bigot. He was anti-Semitic. You just look at the makeup of his White House, not unlike Trump's. There are just no black faces. He had one. There was one black on the staff, guy named Bob Brown, very pleasant guy, didn't have much responsibility. So Nixon actually had admirations for some blacks, though. Senator Brooke of Massachusetts, he thought was a great senator, and he admired him for getting elected and getting his way to the Senate. So he did speak highly.
He might have been not been a fulminating racist himself, but he was willing to employ it for political purposes with the Southern strategy. Is Donald Trump like that, or is he a fulminating racist himself? And how does this tie into authoritarianism?
I think I think Trump's a fulminator, to use your word, and he is of various levels of volume on his fulmination. So he doesn't push it too far. So what's the relationship between racism and authoritarianism? There is a correlation. One of the things in doing the book we did, we relied on science, actually some 40 years of science, 50 years close to it, of trying to understand people who were attracted to an authoritarian leader. It really started after World War II, when German scientists just couldn't understand how a nation like Germany or Italy could be attracted to a Hitler or a Mussolini. They came over here to Berkeley and began their studies. It's really that ongoing study. It's gotten much more sophisticated, much more scientific, and it is a direct thread from the post-World War II era to today, watching these people. It's not a mainstream bit of psychology or sociology, but they are there. In fact, I've been pleased to read some tweets of people who are in these fields saying, thank God somebody has finally come out and explained what's going on with Trump's followers. And it's something of a mystery why nobody did, Tom, and that's one of the reasons we did the book we did. But, who are these people? They are, as I say, we scientifically tested to make sure that this science was right. There are two types of authoritarian personalities that are predominant. They're the so-called social dominators, those who would be leaders but are willing to follow to get up the ladder themselves and get their shot at leading. They're typically men. They have very dominating personalities. They openly oppose equality, and they're desirous of personal power, plus almost universally amoral. So with those key criteria, they fit social science's definition of a social dominator. The right-wing authoritarian follower, that's a scale that's been used to test them over 40, 50 years now. They are both men and women. They are submissive to authority. They're then aggressive on behalf of that authority and highly conventional in their life. Now, these people have been tested for many other personality traits, and some are attractive traits, some are not such attractive traits. But they, because of our relying on old science, if you will, or consistent patterns of science, we did a poll through the Monmouth Polling Institute, a national survey. We started with a poll of about 230,000 people, got it down to a representative pool of American voters that was 990. They took an online battery of tests, personality tests. Not only did they answer polling questions, they spent maybe a half hour to 45 minutes to take a battery of personality tests. And sure enough, Trump's followers are solid authoritarian personalities.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. John, in the roughly 2 minutes we have left until we run head on into a hard break here, what causes people to be authoritarian followers? Is it childhood trauma? Is it genetic? Like temperament? I mean, what's the deal here?
It is both nature and nurture. Altmaier, my collaborator, who's spent years testing these people, thinks it's predominantly child rearing and the influence that parents have on their kids. And if the child has a disposition to one way or the other to either be a dominator or a follower, that can be accentuated through rearing. And so that's why it's probably more nurture than nature.
Yeah, in the last couple of weeks, I've read Mary Trump's book, and I've read this new book, Hate Monger, by Jean Guerrero about Stephen Miller. And both of them had basically abusive, distant fathers who were very, very rich, and that was like the single focus of their life. Is that the kind of thing that turns people into authoritarians?
Definitely. We actually didn't know Mary was writing a book. Mary Trump was writing a book. So we explore much of the same material that she did. We found it in the public record and were able to document very clearly that Donald Trump's authoritarianism comes directly from his father and the influence his father had on him. As Mary says, nobody's ever loved this poor man.
Yeah. Well, and in the half minute we have left, what does that tell us about what we should be doing as a nation, both to deal with these authoritarians and to raise our kids so they're not like this?
Defeat them at the poll. They're people who do not do well in democracy. They are largely unreachable. They're not going to change their mind. Maybe a few of them on the fringe are upset to discover they're deeply prejudiced. So the only real answer is defeating them at the polls. They're not good for democracy.
And for the long term, nurture and support our children, right?
Yes. Education.
Yeah, there we go. John W. Dean, his new book, Authoritarian Nightmare, along with Bob Altmaier, it's brilliant. You got to check it out. John, thanks so much for dropping by. It's great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be back 15 minutes past the hour.
Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. And welcome back. Mary, watching us on Free Speech TV in Chicago. Hey, Mary, what's up?
Yes, I think, the racism that is, out there already, and I think it's fueled by the demographic changes that are happening in the country itself. And I think there's a great deal of anxiety, involving that. And you got somebody like Trump who's exploiting these fears. I agree with what Joe Biden said, yesterday. He's taking the fears and the concerns of a large portion of the population and clearly exploiting them for personal political purposes. And that is what's really
to keep himself out of
going
jail.
on right that now.
Yeah. I agree, Mary.
Yeah.
I agree, and it's troubling. You've got basically a mob boss in the White House. In fact, he's an international mob boss in the White House, and he runs a very small crime syndicate. Mostly his family and a few foreign oligarchs, but he's a crime boss, and he's trying to scare all of America. I mean, I just I don't know how Carlos Marcello or Santo Trafficante in the White House would be any different than this guy. It's somewhere between shocking, startling, and extremely disappointing. Anyhow, Mary, thank you. You said it very well. I appreciate the call. Cindy in Los Angeles. Hey, Cindy, what's up?
Hi. My viewpoint may be a little idealistic, but I wanted to bring in a different kind of idea to this whole thing. I'm a Lebanese American. I was the only one born here in my family. And the current political climate doesn't seem very foreign to me. Racism aside, it doesn't seem like, listening to the news and the debates and the corruption, I just feel like the guys have finally been lifted in the United States, despite this administration being one of the worst we've seen in history. But I do want to say that it could be an open door for a great time of change, despite a lot of hardship that we're going to be facing. And I also want to remind Americans, as a Lebanese American, this is why I mention it. I come from a country, and I've spent almost half my life there going back and forth. Lebanon has a corrupt government. Lebanon doesn't have a government. So, a couple of years ago, trash was all over the street. We didn't have a functioning disposal system. So we rally together and we do something about it. It's called a locus of control. The one thing about the United States is that for some odd reason, out of sight, out of mind, we're working odd hours, paying our bills, we do have control. And we don't have to wait for an administration to pass a law. So I suggest, and let me backtrack, I understand that we're in a very heterogeneous society. And we do tend to stick with our own, quote unquote. And when we do converse together, we put on our, quote unquote, American faces, for lack of a better term. But why not every single person sitting at home right now write down a list of the things that they want and figure out a way to do it? Because you can rally together and do it. And I do want to
talking about building community alliances.
Community alliances, because and let them play. Let the governments play. Let them do their thing. A locus of control. What can you control right now with community development?
I get it. Cindy, I'm sorry we're out of time, but I love it. Thank you very much for sharing your experience with us and for the call. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. The Hartmann Report is a free daily podcast 7 days a week, and you can find our entire 3-hour podcast over at thomhartmann.com. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. "21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. The whole news cycle right now is just in some ways, making my head explode. First of all, thank God, Joe Biden came out yesterday and said, looting is not protest. And basically, well, not basically, and intimidating and killing protesters is not protest. I mean, what we've got going on the Trump side, and, 2 dead in Kenosha and 1 with his arm blown off, and what we've got here in Portland with a dead right winger, they're both wrong. This whole thing is wrong. And Donald Trump, because he's so weak and because he's so scared, is promoting this kind of violence. And he's frankly promoting it on both sides, because Donald Trump believes that if he can upset and anger and freak out and frighten enough people, quote, on the left, that is, just normal Americans and Americans who would like to live in a country where everybody, has a shot at the American dream, if he can freak out and piss off and frighten enough of those folks, they're going to show up in the street. We're going to show up in the streets. And that will produce some good video that they can use to scare people on Fox News. Virtually all of the protests in Portland that were happening when Trump's feds were here were in a 3 square block area concentrated on one building. And after that building had gotten tagged and was covered with graffiti, basically, this was the federal building, people, basically making their statements, as it were. And I'm not defending that at all. That's vandalism. But nonetheless, once that was done, they put a fence around it so nobody could get in, because some of the tagging a block away, literally people from the community, people who were protesting at night, were coming out in the morning and cleaning up the graffiti. But they kept this one building with a fence around it that the police would come out in the evening and stand in front of, that looked like something out of a movie depicting a war zone in a third world country. Because it was the perfect set. They manipulated, essentially, or facilitated protesters creating and some of them, let's be very clear, were not protesters. They were vandals. But the Trump administration got these guys to create for them their TV set that they could use on Fox News and right-wing hate radio. On radio, of course, you can't see the pictures, but you get what I'm saying. And all over the right-wing memosphere. Facebook has become an absolute right-wing cesspool. And then you've got all these right-wing websites and quote, news sources funded by right-wing billionaires, free right-wing newspapers like the Washington Examiner, they give away in New York, the New York Post in D.C., the New York Post in New York, et cetera, et cetera. They have a robust information system because it's been well funded by billionaires and big corporations since the Powell Memo in 1971. And nothing like that exists on the left. I mean, the closest you can get to a left-wing media infrastructure is how you're listening to me or how you're watching me right now. It's, the Sirius XM Progress. It's a handful of progressive radio stations around the country, commercial radio stations. It's a handful of in terms of audience share, a handful of progressive Pacifica stations, nonprofit stations around the country. And on television, you've got Free Speech TV, YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. And, these are all the ways you can get this show. These are also all the ways that you can get basically any kind of progressive programming. But across America, you want to hear right-wing hate? You want to hear right-wingers making nakedly racist statements and amplifying Trump's fear? You can hear that in any city in America. Locally, from the local radio station. You don't even have to have a Sirius XM receiver. If you want to watch it on TV, you don't have to go to Free Speech TV. That obviously they have a huge internet presence, but they're principally on Dish and DirecTV. You can just tune into Fox. It's on basic cable. Or it's all over the internet. So here we have this situation that the more violent it can get, the more wild it can get, the more Donald Trump believes it's going to help him. And I'd been sharing that belief of his up until very recently. I watched him this morning when he did his little press thing in front of the airplane, and he was going on and on and on about the Marxists and the Antifa and the violence and the, da-da-da-da-da-da, and we're going to do something about this. And if the federal forces came in, we'd solve it in an hour, et cetera. And I thought, I'm not buying this crap. I wonder if most Americans are buying this. I mean, Nixon might have been able to sell this stuff. And frankly, George Herbert Walker Bush could sell this stuff to white people around the country, that Michael Dukakis was responsible for the preceding Republican governor letting Willie Horton out. Because the preceding governor was the one who established that program, and he was a Republican. It worked then.
You're listening
I don't think it's going to work now.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I think Trump's strategy is working to get that small slice of hate-filled or fear-filled crazies in the streets. But other than that, I don't think it's working.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is called Let the People Pick the President, The Case for Abolishing the Electoral College by Jesse Wegman. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 20. But what exactly can we do about the Electoral College? People have been trying to answer that question for more than 2 centuries. Since the first proposed amendment to the Electoral College was introduced in Congress in 1797, there have been more than 700 attempts to reform or abolish it, more by far than any other provision of the Constitution. Only one has succeeded, the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804 to fix a technical flaw in the college's design, but left it otherwise intact. In the late 1960s, an amendment abolishing the college and replacing it with a national popular vote passed the House of Representatives and came extraordinarily close in the Senate, but was blocked by a filibuster. At the time, 80% of the American public supported switching to the popular vote, as did President Richard Nixon and other top Republicans and Democrats. To some, this litany of failures speaks to itself. I think it's a waste of time to talk about changing the Electoral College, former President Jimmy Carter said in 2000. Carter had supported a national popular vote in the 60s and the 70s. I would predict that 200 years from now we'll still have the Electoral College, he said. Was President Carter right? Is it simply our fate as Americans to remain trapped by the historical quirks of a Constitution that is too easy to revere and too hard to change? Especially after the failed effort in the 60s, when American politics were far less polarized to today, and there was no simple partisan divide over the issue. It's clear that a constitutional amendment is not in the cards. But there may be another way. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, an agreement among states to award all of their electors to the winner of the national popular vote rather than the winner of their statewide vote. The compact will take effect when it is joined by states representing a majority of electoral votes, 270, thus guaranteeing that the candidate who wins the most votes in the country becomes president. The ingenuity of the compact is that it doesn't touch the Constitution. Its target is the statewide winner-take-all rule, currently in use in 48 states. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. This rule is what makes presidents out of popular vote losers. It incentivizes presidential campaigns to ignore more than 100 million American voters living in non-competitive states, turning what should be a national electoral contest into a series of bitter, hyper-local brawls. It focuses nearly all campaign spending and policy proposals on a few so-called battleground states, where even a small shift in voting can lead to an electoral jackpot for one side or another. That familiar red and blue map we all obsess over every 4 years, it's nothing but a visual representation of state winner-take-all rules, with each state stamped Democratic or Republican, as though that is its true identity, regardless of how many voters from the other party cast a ballot there. This is bad for democracy, and it should concern all Americans, no matter where they live or which political party they support. In contrast, when candidates know that all votes are equal, and they need a majority of them to win, they're forced to seek the support of all Americans and craft policies that appeal to as many people as possible. The Popular Vote Compact was launched in 2006 and got its first member state, Maryland, the following year. As of October 2019, 15 states in the District of Columbia, together representing 196 electoral votes, had joined. 74 more, and the compact takes effect. So far, only Democratic majority states have joined the compact. And while the 2016 election dealt a significant setback to efforts to enlist Republican-led states, lawmakers of both parties around the country continue to support it, and Republican-led chambers have passed it in 4 states. Critics of the compact call it an end run around the Constitution. And it's true that the Constitution's framers never mentioned something like a popular vote compact. They also never mentioned the winner-take-all rule, but that didn't stop the majority of states from rapidly adopting it to benefit themselves. That's the whole point of the compact. The framers gave states near total control over how to allocate their electors. The fact that the compact is an agreement among states also means that, unlike a constitutional amendment, which is effectively permanent, member states may back out if they later decide they don't want to be a part of it. Opponents of the popular vote argue that no matter how you might achieve it, it's not the way our country is built. As the popular saying goes, we're a republic, not a democracy. The Electoral College is one of the core Republican elements of the framers' constitutional design, like the Senate and the Supreme Court, which are there precisely to prevent majorities from running rampant. In other words, majority rule is not our only organizing principle, and perhaps not even our most important. There are 2 problems, however, with this argument. The minor one is on the surface and involves terminology. The United States is both a republic and a representative democracy. The two terms describe the same thing, a government in which the people hold the ultimate power but elect representatives to make laws, policies, and other decisions on their behalf. The founders used the term republic to distinguish what they were building from a monarchy. For them, democracy generally referred to the direct variety, as in ancient Athens or the New England town meeting, where the people literally make the laws themselves. But American politics at the national level has never been and never will be a direct democracy. So any distinction between the terms today is meaningless. As one political columnist put it, to say that the U.S. is a republic and not a democracy is like claiming to eat beef and pork, but not cows and pigs. The bigger problem with the saying is the implication that lies beneath it. The book, Let the People Pick the President, by Jesse Wegman.
In the science revolution this week, is Trump burying the pandemic, and will it work? Dr. Michael Mann is here about the Greenland ice sheet losing 1 million tons a minute. He'll explain what that means to us. Dr. Michael Greger drops by, and one of the most important questions right now, what can be done to stop the spread of animal-derived diseases? And director Dan Partland is here on his new film, Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. So we've had a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the folks who support our program. It's about two people you probably never heard of, Isabel Cairo and Jay Sim. They are economists with the Federal Reserve, and they just came out with this extraordinary new paper. It was actually published by the Fed, in which they point out that most of the economic crises and problems that we're experiencing in the United States, going back to the 1980s, the stagnation in wages, the actual drop in wages, the stagnation in household income as more and more people in households are working, the explosion in the net worth of the top 5% of households, things that are driving, credit bubbles and other, stock bubbles and things like this. A dramatic amount of that was the result of monopoly power, corporate monopoly power. And about half of that could have been eliminated if we simply taxed unearned income. It's amazing. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And interesting kind of developing story. 2 hours ago, apparently just as this show was starting or in the neighborhood of that, Donald Trump tweeted, first of all, let me set this up. There has been speculation that when Trump was taken to Walter Reed back in November of last year, and Mike Pence was told to stand by if he has to go through any kind of procedure, you're going to be the acting president. And he was hustled out of the White House. And the White House has an extensive little mini hospital in it, with a full-time doctor 24/7. So they can deal with, most things, right? But they can't deal with big stuff that requires MRI machines or CAT scanners, they may even have a CAT scanner, but, big machine. They can't do that at the White House. And so they hustled him into this SUV and boom, unscheduled trip to Walter Reed. And there has been speculation that he had suffered a stroke because he's been dragging his left foot. You can see it, or maybe it's his right foot. You can see it in a number of videos where he's, going places and doing things. For a while, he lost use of one of his arms. He couldn't drink a glass of water. Stuff like this. These are signs of a stroke. But nobody, to the best of my knowledge, and I am being echoed in this across the internet, nobody was suggesting that he had a series of mini strokes. Now, in this program back in November, I posited, maybe it's a mini stroke. You get these little tiny strokes that produce some small symptoms, and, typically they resolve themselves. Sometimes they don't. In fact, there's one of the main theories of dementia is that it is actually caused by the accumulation, the concatenation of a whole string over a period of time of little micro strokes that happen when, that can happen as a result of either, a genetic predisposition to them, vascular weakness, or having been a smoker for years and years, which really seriously damages your veins and arteries permanently for the rest of your life, or simply, getting very dehydrated every night. A lot of people drink a glass of wine before they go to bed, and they wake up in the morning just incredibly thirsty. Well, that dehydration makes you more vulnerable to little small strokes, little tiny blood clots that form in the brain. And so it's not always caused by a glass of wine, but you get my point. And so there was this question, and I was saying, gee, I wonder if that's what it is. But nobody was saying, quote, series of mini strokes. And to the best of my knowledge, I didn't read anybody else saying mini stroke. I was the one who was drawing that distinction, just because I had seen that with my own father. I mean, we saw this happen. So 2 hours ago, Donald Trump tweeted, and I'm reading the tweet right here from the screen, quote, "It never ends. Now they are trying to say that your favorite president, me, went to Walter Reed Medical Center having suffered a series of mini strokes." Well, no, that's not what they're saying. What they're asking is if you had a stroke. But now Trump is coming out saying a series of mini strokes. Really? And then he goes on to say, never happened to this candidate. Fake news. Perhaps they're referring to another candidate from another party. Right. So it's mini strokes, is it? Amazing. He just, if he had the intellect and discipline of Tom Cotton, we would be full on Germany 1935 right now. But, because he's not that bright, and he's not that disciplined, and he's just a giant id. He's just a giant. He's this blob that is just constantly me, my mine. I want more. I mean, that's Donald Trump. Please love me. He's a weak, frightened little man. I get it. He's physically large, but as a person, he views himself as a child, as a victim, a perpetual victim. So, anyway, Ellen in Newburgh, New York. Hey, Ellen, what's up?
Hey there. I'm calling from New York, the capital of anti-Trump land. And I just wanted to talk to you about the Lincoln Project, how it started out as, Republicans defecting from Trump. And it has evolved over these months into a American coalition. I happen to be a Democrat, and there are more Democrats getting involved, and it's just becoming more of like a democratic, democracy where people from all persuasions, all political persuasions are,
Ellen, I believe the entire leadership of the Lincoln Project is Republicans. That's their brand. We are Republicans who don't like basically fascism or Trumpism. But, several of these folks have spoken out fairly forcefully in the last few weeks, saying we are still Republicans. We still believe in, quote, individual responsibility, which means if you're poor, it's your fault. Sorry, we're going to defend the rich people. We still believe in balanced budgets. In other words, we're going to use this as an excuse to fight social programs. They're still opposed to expanding Medicare and Social Security and things like that. They're still all in favor of big corporations ruling this country.
Right.
I mean, they've essentially come right out and said this. Steve Schmidt and George Conway, the guys who started this program, and now many of the Republicans who have joined them, none of them have changed their philosophy. They're just saying Donald Trump doesn't fit into that philosophy. He's too crazy for us. And that's my concern, is that, they are showing Democrats and Democratic strategists how to do good messaging, which is tragic that Democrats didn't have that ability to begin with, right? It just shocks me. Although there's been some good Democratic stuff, but it's been mostly coming from people like Don Winslow. It's been coming from outside the party. But number one, they're doing that. And number two, I think they're positioning themselves right now to be a political force after the election if Joe Biden is elected, which they're doing everything they can to make happen, so that they can push Joe Biden in the direction of privatizing Social Security and Medicare, push Joe Biden in the direction of privatizing the post office, push Joe Biden in the direction of massively cutting social spending in the United States, because that's their agenda.
Right, I understand that, and I think that that's how they're trying to set it up, is like, we hate Trump, we don't want him in office, we want Biden. Now, I understand that, and I wanted to say that I don't know if that's turning off progressives and they're, less motivated to go to the polls, but we need everybody.
Oh, I agree. We need everybody to be messaging on this, and I acknowledge the really great messaging that the Lincoln Project is doing. But my cautionary note is, let us not think that these guys are on our side. The enemy of my enemy is my friend is not a lifetime strategy. It's strategic. It's short termed, and I think that's what we have to do. Ellen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call. Michelle in Denver. Hey, Michelle, you got the last minute here before we hit a break. What's up?
I would say I agree with the other callers. Why stay in this country if we're going to be total authoritarian and black people and brown people aren't going to get major protections?
Well, first off, Michelle, your American passport will not get you into any country in the world right now, pretty much.
Right now. But if Trump wins, I'm German. I have relatives, so I would find my way over there. Because we're not being protected. We're 14% of the population. Maybe the National Guard needs to be called in to start escorting us to work and everywhere else like they did back in the 60s, because unfortunately, these guys are not going to stop. The genie's out of the box, and you're not going to even be able to put it back in. So these people are nuts. Have you ever been around them? I've been around them.
Yes.
I've seen them. Yeah. They spit in people's faces. They push people to incite violence. And we don't know if one of the protesters shot that Trump supporter.
Yeah. Well, we have a pretty good idea who did it, but I don't think that anybody can justify killing anybody on either side. Frankly, this is not a war. And the people who are calling for a war need to be called out at the very least. Michelle, thank you for your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
I think we all get it. We're all on edge. The country is, being pushed as hard as possible by right-wing hate mongers. Yeah, and welcome back. Let's see here. Sandra in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Sandra, thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Hi. Well, earlier they were all talking about these comments that Trump had made about these thugs heading to Portland. The first image that came to my mind wasn't black people. It was his federal, quote-unquote, cops being sent to Portland. Those were the thugs that I was thinking. The first thought came to mind. And I wonder, am I the only one that thought that? Because
I don't. When I hear the word thug coming out of Donald Trump's mouth or out of his tweet, I know that he's talking about black people. I mean, we've been watching
the first image,
40 years.
The very first image was those people dressed in black, waving their guns around.
My first image, Sandra, was that. My first thought was, I'll bet it's a basketball team, but that's assuming that the guy was telling the truth, right?
Yeah.
It might have been. Some troll in one of the troll farms in Russia or Estonia or Latvia or Ukraine or wherever the hell they are these days.
Yeah.
Just trying to stir people up, like they got that. They got 50 people here in this little town in Oregon back a few months ago. Out on the streets with their guns, waiting for the Antifa thugs to show up in a bus. And of course, nobody was even, first of all, there is no Antifa. It's you are anti-fascist or you are pro-fascist. And, there's no address that you can send a letter to Antifa to. And secondly, I mean, this is just a boogeyman that's been built on Fox News and right-wing hate radio. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
But Sandra, I get what you're saying. And go ahead.
Yeah. I don't know. Come Veterans Day, I hope that when they decorate their ancestors' graves that fought in all the wars, that they'd remember that they were Antifa also. So.
Exactly. Yeah. My dad was an anti-fascist. He volunteered to fight against the Germans and the Japanese. Sandra, thank you for the call. Deborah in Columbia, Tennessee. Hey, Deborah, thank you for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Thank you for taking my call. Yeah, actually, staying on point with the last caller's comment. For me, the first thing I thought of, Trump speaks truth out loud, but usually with a twist. He flip-flops things. And when he was accusing these thugs or BLM of getting into planes dressed in black, it occurred to me that it might be a militia that's been put together by Eric Prince, boarding planes and sent to racially charged areas. Eric Prince has, as we know, is tied strongly with Trump and his campaign. He has donated millions of dollars, and I've had a fear in the back of my mind that he has a private army that he has been training and putting together to send out into the U.S. Especially if he wins in 2020. So I just wanted to know your thought on this, and could this possibly be, little pieces of Eric Prince being tied to this?
I think it could be, Deborah. I think it could be. And if they're developing a secret army or an armed militia in addition to the ones that we know about, then that could be, that might even be Donald Trump's October surprise. Nothing would surprise me at this point. Deborah, thank you for the call. Spot on. We'll be right back. The hidden history of the war on voting tells how the GOP has been stealing elections for decades and will again this year unless we stop them. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. Hey, my new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. We're having a coronavirus-safe book tour. I'll be at Powell's virtual bookstore event in conversation with David Corton, Tuesday, August 25th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. Go to powells.com and get your tickets for the live stream event. And on Friday, September 4th at 6 p.m. Pacific time, I'll be at a Town Hall Seattle virtual event, and you can get your tickets for that live stream event at townhallseattle.org. There are also links at thomhartmann.com. I'll be taking you from the birth of America through FDR to the Reagan Revolution and today. In the foreword of my book, Ralph Nader says, "This is the most important, dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. So be sure to go to thomhartmann.com and sign up for one of these two great virtual book signings. Powell's in Portland and Town Hall Seattle. Don't miss it and sign up now. Tag you're it. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Adam in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Adam, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, hey, Tom. How you doing? Thanks for taking my call. I was just thinking there seems to be this resistance toward doing anything about election tampering from foreign governments. And I'm wondering, now that it's really come out more clearly that we have Iran and China, not just Russia, doing that, and it seems to me that both Iran and China would probably prefer a Biden administration over a Trump administration.
Adam, let me just stop you right there. Iran and China are not interfering in our elections. If you look at both the Senate Intelligence Committee report, which was signed off on by all the Republicans on the committee, a committee led by a Republican, it explicitly says that the Iranians and the Chinese are not involving themselves in our elections. The Russians are involving themselves in our elections. Adam, the story that you're telling is coming from Donald Trump. When the Intelligence Committee and the Department of and his intelligence agencies issued this, released this about a month ago, and they came right out and they said, Russia is actively engaged in involving itself in our elections. Iran and China have indicated a preference for Donald Trump to be elected president, but they are not doing anything. Trump turned that around, and I'm assuming that you're trying to turn that around, Adam, to say, it's apples versus apples. And it's not apples versus apples, Adam. It is, you've got basically one country aggressively supporting Trump, doing so. In fact, the report just came out like an hour ago. 7.5 million Michigan voters found on the server of a Russian hacker. 7.5 million Michigan voters. The Chinese and the Iranians, they are not involved in this. And whether they want Biden or Trump, is pretty much irrelevant at this point. There's a lot of countries around the world. Germany would probably rather have Biden. England would probably, well, God only knows about England, but at least at the level of Boris Johnson. But I mean, pick your country. But there's really, as far as we can tell, there is one country that's actively engaged in this election tampering, and that's Russia. And if you read Seth Abramson's work, there are a couple of other countries that have historically been involved in tampering with our elections, and they also support Donald Trump, and that's Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, along with some billionaires in Israel. I mean, Seth Abramson lays it all out in his book, Proof of Conspiracy. So this story that caller was just trying to sell to us, that, Russia's supporting Trump and Iran and China, with two countries, not just one, are supporting Biden, is a lie. It is fundamentally, simply, purely a lie. And it's a lie that's being promoted by Trump. It's a lie that's being promoted on Fox News. It's a lie that's being promoted on right-wing talk radio. Go back and read, and this is why it's so hard to knock down these lies. In order to knock down a lie like this, you've actually got to do a little bit of homework. And that's what the liars are counting on. They're counting on suckers like our previous caller, or shills like our previous caller, but I'm assuming that he's just a sucker, listening to right-wing hate radio or watching Fox News or listening to Donald Trump, for that matter, who lies on average 15 to 20 times a day. They're counting on people listening to those lies and thinking, that must be what's so. Because, the average American is not going to go read a giant report from the Senate Intel Committee, although it's pretty damn shocking reading, I'm telling you. So anyhow, that's the bottom line. End of rant. Robert in Fairbanks, Alaska. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, I'm glad to get on to talk to you. I think that the liberal left, I think if you would read George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia, you'd find that that's the problem the left has. We're so diffuse. We have people from the Society Prevention of Cruelty to Animals all the way to, I'm personally very motivated I have a desire to want to take up arms against the right, like Spanish Civil War. But I
not
don't.
A good idea, Robert.
No, it's not a good idea, and I don't have any. I'm 74 years old, suffering from cancer, so I've been pretty well denutted that way. But I just think that the problem, I don't know how the left can organize, because a fascist system can always beat a diffuse system. I mean, the history of the Spanish Civil War shows that. And I don't think many people realize that George Orwell took a bullet right through the neck during that war. You know that?
I didn't know that, no.
He got shot through the neck. It didn't kill him. But if you read his story, it's how difficult it is for left-wing people to organize against somebody like Donald Trump. The guy is a goddamn fascist, and I can't stand him.
Yeah, I get it, Robert, and we can't use language like that on the air, so I'm going to have to let you go. But although I doubt that the FCC is going to get all upset about that, but my apologies to anybody who might have been offended. But the bottom line is, dealing with fascism has always been a struggle for every country around the world. If you read William Scheer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, it was the same situation. And you had the labor unions and the Marxists and other marginalized groups who were essentially fighting with each other instead of fighting Hitler. in the early days. And I think, you know, we need to pull together here.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Omaha Steaks, gourmet you can trust. More information at omahasteaks.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, TEF, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teef.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, aka brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by Ralph Nader, Breaking Through Power.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So there's welcome back to our program, by the way. So there's some kind of grody stuff going on at the intersection of big business and pharmaceuticals. On the line with us is Ellie Zupnik with Accountable.us, spokesperson for Accountable Pharma. Ellie, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be on.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Tell us about, I heard Donald Trump, day before yesterday, I think, doing a whole riff about how he was cutting drug prices. He was talking about this at the Republican convention. He talks about it during his rallies and things, and everybody's, cut those drug prices. I think, most people wouldn't know if he had actually cut drug prices. It's not like there's a scoreboard like the Dow Jones Industrial that we see on a regular basis. They may just know about their own pharmaceuticals, and they may think that those are the exception rather than the rule. Who knows? But what's going on here?
Well, I think you set it up exactly right. This is an issue that Trump has been talking about for years. He started on the campaign talking about it. He mentions it every State of the Union. He talks about it. He tweets about it. He says that he's an enemy of Big Pharma and that he's been reducing drug prices and that Democrats would do the opposite. It's clearly something that's important for his brand, but the reality is that, as you noted, he has done absolutely nothing to actually reduce drug prices. Anyone who gets their prescription drugs knows this very well, and no amount of tweets are going to really make a difference in how they think about this. So that takes us to what has been happening this last month when Trump, he held a big press conference on July 24th, apparently realizing that he had spent 3 years not delivering on this big promise that he'd made. And he had a big conference and said that he was going to be signing executive orders to reduce the price of prescription drugs. He signed those orders. He signed 3 of them. One of them, which is the one that the pharmaceutical industry claimed to be most upset about, was one called an International Pricing Index, or other people call it a Most Favored Nations policy. I could go into the details, but the reality is they're not that important because it's not going to be implemented. But this one, Trump made a threat. He said that he was going to hold off on actually implementing it unless the pharmaceutical companies came back by August 24th with a proposal that would go even further, that would substantially reduce drug prices. This was widely seen as an empty threat. Most analysts who saw these executive orders correctly saw that they would almost certainly not be implemented in time for Trump's first term to end. So they were seen as an empty gesture. But as we know well, as you noted, and as we've seen time and again from Trump, he cares more about the flash and the message and the press conference than he does about the actual implementation. So what happened next was really interesting, and that is that we saw the drug industry erupt in this faux outrage campaign. They pretended to be aggrieved. They pretended that this would actually hurt them. They put out a statement, their main lobbying arm, Pharma, put out a statement saying that it was socialist. Drug company executives had been planning to go to the White House. They canceled their visit. The National Association of Manufacturers, a drug industry ally, began running TV ads saying that Trump was hurting the innovation of the ability of drug companies to innovate. Trump then responded, as you've seen, as folks have seen, saying things like, drug companies are attacking me, so you know that I'm on your side. I've been reducing drug prices. He created exactly the spectacle that he hoped to create. He got great headlines. He looked like he was fighting Big Pharma. Big Pharma was playing their part in the game perfectly. Now, if you fast forward to a month later, August 24th, the day that he said he would be delivering on this threat if Pharma didn't come through with their response, we heard absolutely nothing. Crickets. Reporters wrote about trying to reach the HHS and see what was going on. They didn't hear anything. Nothing. One thing that we did hear in the interim was drug company CEOs were telling their shareholders on their earnings calls in August that they had nothing to worry about, that they, despite what they may hear in the news, they're not expecting any impact from these executive orders. The Eli Lilly CEO told his shareholders that the most likely scenario is that they don't even take force prior to a new term. So these drug company executives were being honest with their shareholders, but playing the game with the public in order to make it seem like there was this big fight happening.
That's mind-boggling.
2 days later, this is classic Trump. So after August 24th, when people started to note that he had made this threat, he said on midnight on August 24th, we're going to be delivering on this promise to reduce drug prices. In the interim, he had been tweeting as if he already signed this executive order, saying that drug prices were coming down 50, 60, 70%, which would be untrue if this were actually implemented, and was double untrue because he never even signed it. People hadn't even seen the text of this executive order, which is unprecedented. Usually when an executive order is signed or announced, it goes into the Federal Register. That hadn't happened. It was a hidden executive order. In the hopes that he claims that Pharma would deliver something more, but we know that's not true. So 2 days after the deadline, we finally hear about this counter proposal that had been discussed, and it turns out to, not shockingly, deliver nothing close to the savings that Trump was promising. It would be less than what analysts expect from an executive order, even if an executive order were ever implemented. It would essentially kill off actual international pricing index policies, which are not bad policies. They just aren't going to happen under President Trump. And one thing that was particularly interesting in Pharma's response was they put in writing in their memo to him that they said even though the impact would be less, they said it would come before the election and it could happen faster than a rule could come. So clearly implying to Trump or trying to tease to him that he could show some kind of results pre-election if he went their way, which wouldn't actually hurt their bottom line, rather than go his way, which they think would hurt their bottom line just a little bit more. So that's where we stand. There's been no real response from the White House. Just a little while ago, Trump, before he got on the airplane, was asked about this by a reporter, and he said he's meeting with the drug companies this week. We'll believe it when we see it. We don't know if that's actually going to happen. But as of now, Trump is still out there tweeting and saying that he has reduced prices with this executive order that nobody's seen, that he put a threat out into the world that the pharmaceutical industry called, and they called his bluff. And right now, nobody's seeing any lower drug prices because of it.
Yeah, or your $110 drug just became a $109.20 drug. This is pretty remarkable. We're talking with Ellie Zupnik of Accountable.us. Ellie, we just have a minute left till we hit a hard break here. Is there any pushback to this? I mean, obviously your group is pointing this out, but are you seeing other politicians pushing back on these lies and this BS coming out of the Trump administration?
Not as much as there should be, and I think that's a product of Trump's regular playbook of just throwing so many things out there that it's hard to keep up and hard to respond to everything. But people should be mad about this. They should be see this as as just another broken promise that it is. I mean, he is telling them that he has reduced their prices. He is lying to them. He is saying that he is threatening the pharmaceutical industry and pretending to have this big fight over an executive order when it's just not true. And meanwhile, like always under President Trump, the people who are paying the price are patients who are not seeing lower drug costs, who are continuing to see their prices go up. The pharmaceutical industry makes more and more profit. They push some of that to Trump, and they're happy, and patients are not.
Amazing. Ellie Zupnik, the Twitter handle ELIZUPNICK. Accountable.us is the website. Ellie is the spokesperson for Accountable Pharma. Ellie, thanks a lot for dropping by today.
Thank you for having me on.
My pleasure. Great talking with you. We'll be back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Oh my, what a day, huh? Jessica in Chicago. Hey, Jessica, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching Free Speech TV.
Hi, Tom. When you first talked about a civil war, I thought that was crazy, but now I agree. I think that Trump's trying to incite a civil war between blue and red states, and I want to say I loved on one of your shows when you said we can't have a war if nobody shows up. And I think Portland should paint that in the street and not show up. And then Trump's occupied force and the Booger Boys be there.
Yeah, it was a line in Old Country Joe and the Fish song. What if they gave a war and no one showed up? It was a rhetorical question, but I think it's a brilliant question. And my preference would be. I think people showing up in the streets and people protesting is a good and healthy thing. But when people start lighting stuff on fire, they lose me. I don't know how to say it beyond that, but spot on. Thanks a lot for the call, Jessica. Robin in Kingston, Washington. Hey, Robin, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for the call here. I want to just kind of share with you and actually your listeners kind of a permit to remember as we approach November. There are a lot of sort of historical things that older and then also contemporary that we might remember. And I sadly, at the moment, I have it 50-50 Biden-Trump. I just would like the left, those who are activists, to remember the big picture is that Bill Bennett and Reagan's undermining of public education is really, really working well. So we have to deal with that. And then don't get too gloated about.
They basically ended civics education across the country. It's mind-boggling.
Yes,
it was communist, you know.
Yes, Tom, I agree with you. But what the warning flags for me that I'm fighting against every week, and everything I bring to you is anecdotal. I still work the streets a lot. Just remember that the approval of Congress is very, very low, and so we sort of have that wind is against us. Also, please remember that most people start to pay attention, not in your own progressive circles, but most citizens start to pay attention in October, and then also
after
coupled
Labor Day.
with that is most citizens also vote emotions, and in this case, and you have Donald Trump exactly pigeonholed. You have his tactics and his personality completely correct now. Okay, and so most people and citizens vote emotions of fear. So this is a good conversation that we can have with other people. The bigger thing is, it's still, don't deny the fact that it's still quite a racist and a misogynist country. I'm in the streets with pro-women signs, and I get more rejection from that than you would want. The other thing is that Democrats are generally good at governing, but they're not really good at winning elections, and the Republicans are the opposite. So we have to stand up. Republicans are great at winning and stealing elections, and they're very good at governing just for the few. And then finally, I must say, do not ignore the down ballot issues here. This is so big, and actually that's what the Trojan Horse Project is all about. It's down ballot. And finally, the solution is women getting to the polls. So,
yeah, I'm with you, Robin. And on those down ballot races, I wish there were more ballot initiatives and things like that on marijuana legalization, bring young people out. We'll be right back. You can help America return to democracy by telling friends and family how to listen to this and other great progressive programs. Tag You're It. So if you are a middle class, working class, whatever you want to call it, person in the United States, and you own your own home, which is, I believe, a little over 60% of American families, every year you pay a wealth tax. You pay a tax on what is, for the vast majority of Americans, their largest single asset. Your single largest asset, your home. It's called a property tax, but it's a tax you pay on wealth every year. You got a house worth $100,000, you pay a 1% property tax, you're going to pay $1,000 a year, whatever it may be. I mean, and property tax is very typically higher than 1%. So why is it that if working class people are paying a wealth tax every year on their principal assets, why aren't billionaires paying a tax on their principal assets? Well, California's fixing to change that, or maybe, and I've got a piece up over at thomhartmann.com about it. You can check it out. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Tim in Aloha, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's up?
Yeah, I've been a loyal listener and watcher of your program for years. What do you think about the last week or two? I mean, what's happening across this country? And I was talking to the young gal who was interviewing before I talked to you. I have a good education. And, it's funny. I just listened to one of your spiels. I own my house. I have flawless credit. I mean, I could go on and good education. But I have friends like me that all over the country, and they're scared. They are literally scared because they go into their local towns, and these people, the misinformation is beyond comprehension, especially in the Midwest and the South. I've got friends in Orlando, Florida that are teachers. They're scared. They are literally scared of what's going on. And the fact that lunatic may actually be reelected, when they say he has 43% of the vote, if it was 4.3%, that would be too much based on what he's doing. Every time that guy opens his mouth, he's either directly or indirectly affecting people's lives adversely. You think about that, with this COVID stuff, it's the scary stuff.
Except for the billionaires.
Yeah, except for the billionaires, exactly. Yeah, and as long as they have that power, you see what I mean. Even if Biden and Kamala Harris get in there, and the Republicans maintain the Senate, you've got, it's going to be a battle because they know they can put billions of dollars into the system to try to run it back to where we are now. I mean, this is getting scary stuff. When you have to solicit funds to stay on the air, and Rush Limbaugh makes $87 million a year, where do you think we're going to go from that? You see what I mean? That's scary.
I do. And I know, Tim, and we're up against a hell of a climb here. That said, I think that for most Americans, I think that the hateful white minority, hate is not something that's unique to white people, but hate and power combined is unique to white people in this country. And that hateful minority is just that, a minority. And I think that, most Americans of all races and all religions are good and decent people. And the impact of leadership is real. When the leader of a country starts promoting something, whether it's racial healing or racial division, whether it's giving everything to the billionaire class, or whether it's building Medicare and Social Security and things like that for the average person. Right. When the leader of the country starts promoting something, you're going to have about a third of the country, regardless of parties, that's going to follow that person because they're basically low information voters. They're taking people at their word. They're taking what's being said for face value, and leadership counts. Reagan
Tom,
famously said elections have consequences.
Yeah, but we have to realize too, we talked before. I own my home. I've been in the same neighborhood. I'm the last original owner in my neighborhood. I've been in this neighborhood for 30 years, and I was in sales and marketing in the area for over 20. So I understand how the system works. The key element, and I walk my town every day. I talk to business owners, neighbors, that kind of thing. The real key element to this whole thing, I call it's complacency. Enough of them know what's going on, but they have that, I can't do anything about it. It's a national level. There's really no difference between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, that kind of ideology. It's scary stuff. This is people in my town that I talk to. Now go to Amite, Mississippi and talk to somebody. You see what I mean? It's scary.
I do. And we're reading stories from all over the country of people putting Biden signs in their yards, and they're being constantly stolen, and areas being absolutely flooded with Trump signs, and people progressives are more reluctant to go vandalize somebody's home apparently than right wingers. But Tim, I got to move along. Thank you. Your points were well made. VK in Fort Worth, Texas. Hey, VK, what's up?
Hi, Tom. If you remember, in the Supreme Court decision Trump v. Vance this July, Chief Justice John Roberts and the four liberals said that Trump had absolutely no immunity to be sued in his personal capacity for tax fraud or whatever. My question is, when Trump challenges the results of the election in the 2020 election, do you think Roberts will allow Trump to lose, or will he side for Trump?
That's a good question, VK, and I don't have the answer to it. But I do think that if this election is even within 3 or 4 points, if it's that close, and we shouldn't even be calling that close. I mean, the election in 2000 was Al Gore won by 500,000 votes, and it took the Supreme Court to give that election to George W. Bush. I think that your point is very real, and it's entirely possible. So. We'll see. Vic in Tustin, Michigan. Hey, Vic, what's up?
Hi, Tom. You were speaking earlier about President Trump, about the way he's walking. He may have had a stroke. Could it be that he just has bone spurs in the bottom of his feet?
No, if you watch the way that he's walking, Vic, people with bone spurs tend to walk as if their feet hurt, because they do. Trump was swinging his leg out and around in order to move his foot from behind to forward. He was basically maneuvering his foot with his leg above the knee, with the above the knee part of his leg, as if the below the knee part of his leg was not working properly. That was a very different thing from bone spurs. And of course, what we know about his bone spurs is that he didn't have bone spurs. His father paid a doctor to pull out an x-ray from somebody who had bone spurs. And by the way, that was not that uncommon back in the 60s. Not necessarily bone spurs, but there were a lot of people who were figuring out ways to get out of going to fight an illegal war. I get that.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
But Trump then embracing the war after he got 5 deferments, that's a tough one.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
For the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, we're reading from Biased, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudice That Shapes What We See, Think, and Do. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, we should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that, though because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is, the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president, and absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
And one of the most important questions right now, what can be done to stop the spread of animal-derived diseases? And director Dan Partland is here on his new film, Unfit, The Psychology of Donald Trump. Tune into the science revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Hi, Thom Hartmann here. My new book is out, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream. American monopolies dominate, control, and consume most of the energy of our entire economic system. They function the same as cancer does in a body. And like cancer, they weaken our systems while threatening to crash the entire body economic. American monopolies have also seized massive political power and use it to maintain their obscene profits and CEO salaries while crushing small competitors. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, quote, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation," end quote. It's the fourth in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. And welcome back, Dave in Las Vegas. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Mr. Hartmann, thanks again. If Donald Trump actually declares Marxist insurrection, how would the military respond to that? And what is your feeling about that?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, there's no law against being a Marxist, number one. Number two, Black Lives Matter and Marxist insurrection are typically not phrases that exist in the same sentence on the left. Black Lives Matter is about police and killing black people first and foremost, and secondly, about just the general violence across white society directed against black people. I can't speak for Black Lives Matter, but that's my understanding of what they're all about. Whereas, I'm guessing the number of Marxists in this country is very, real Marxists is very, very small, and they're not interested in launching an insurrection. They're interested in getting together for study groups. It's just, this is just rhetoric right out of Nixon's 1968 campaign. That's what's going on. You've got Roger Stone advising Donald Trump, and Donald Trump, running the old 1968 Republican playbook. And I just don't think it's going to work anymore. I really don't. Dave, thanks for the call. Kristen in Chattanooga. Hey, Kristen, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I was calling to see if you've heard about Tennessee passing this new law that makes it a felony to camp on government property. So
yeah, I read about that. They did that in response to protesters sleeping, setting up tents on the lawn near the State House, right?
Yeah, right. They've been camped out waiting to talk to the governor, and he's ignored them and gone behind our back, and within a month it's passed. And so, so they're take away your right to vote if you're protesting. I mean, it's ridiculous, and I don't know
who's your governor in Tennessee?
Bill Lee.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've got a Republican governor, a Republican House, and a Republican Senate in Tennessee, so you're kind of stuck in this thing.
Screwed. I'm kind of
it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, this is the people saying we want to have a meeting we want to hear from our governor about these particular issues, and the governor, instead of saying, well, okay, let's have a meeting, or I'll meet you, in my office, or elect a representative to talk to me, or anything, the governor is just saying, I'm a Republican. We don't believe in the First Amendment. We don't believe in people's right to peaceably assemble and petition their government for redress of grievances. We are authoritarians. We are the fascists. We don't give a rat's ass about what the people care about, unless the people happen to be, white, right-wing racists with guns. Those are the only people that we care about. And it's a real tragedy, Kristen, that Bill Lee is going down that road. Kristen, I got to move along, but thank you for the call, and thanks for pointing that out and bringing this issue up. Ree in Nampa, Idaho. Hey, Ree, what's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you. Listening to you, I did three things. I'm doing three things because I can't go to rallies anymore. But one of the things I did is I did confirm my registration and found out my mailing address was wrong. So I was glad I did that. The second thing that I've been doing, and I'm making calls all the time, and I'm right in the middle of writing a kind of a protest letter, you might say, a grievance letter, and also sending emails, and then sending to their D.C. addresses as well as their state addresses. And the third thing is new for me that I found out, and that was that the government has a site, .gov, where you can write a complaint, and you can write as many as you want to, and you can also go to Google and get the whatever your complaint or issue is, what the law is that's being broken, and what the code is for that. So, I could add that to my complaint. And I'm doing this because I want my voice to be heard, and that my vote will count. A couple years ago, my daughter said something to me at a rally. She said that, are they going to hear us? Do you think they see us or hear us? And I said, you can't unhear something and you can't unsee something. So you do everything you can to make your voice count. And that's all I wanted to say.
Ree, I think that you're represented both on the federal and state level entirely by Republicans. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. Yep. But that doesn't scare me.
So, no, I get that. I'm wondering if the one thing I didn't hear you say is that you're reaching out to your Republican representatives, or was that the email that you were talking about, that you're sending it to their local
emails,
offices?
letters, and phone calls. I've made a lot of phone calls to them. And the other thing about not being able to unhear things is that the people the staff that's getting these calls, I don't know if they're screening them or not, but it doesn't matter. That's one more person that's hearing me.
Yep.
And
we all need to be speaking out.
Yes. And so I just wanted to share that with you. And I appreciate that that I'm learning a lot from you. Okay.
Well, thank you, Ree. Thank you, Ree. I have to move along to the next caller, but thank you so much for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. Tim in Chenley Park, Illinois. Hey, Tim, what's up?
How you doing, Tom? When it comes to the word fomenting, I do believe you that the president is not above fomenting.
Well, I was using the word fulminating, which is like a sore that is weeping, is throwing out pus and stuff like that. I mean, but fomenting is fine.
Shouting, expressing yourself, whatnot. But I called to ask you a question, though. I have read your book from cover to cover on the hidden history of the Second Amendment and guns, and I have then went through the whole book and then highlighted all sorts of parts in it from the first probably 10 or 12, the first 10 or 12 chapters. Basically, I would have to say that it is fomenting hatred to anybody who's white. I don't know how you can get away with that. I mean, how you can get around thinking that you read your book and it's going to be, man, you better hate everybody who's white and everybody who's European.
No, Tim, that is very definitely not the message. That is very definitely not the message of the book. It's not even in the intended message of the book. But the fact of the matter is that white people committed the largest, in North America, committed the largest genocide in the history of the human race against Native people, against Native Americans, and then seized Africans and brought them here over a period of 300 years on a regular basis to be slaves. And, if we can't acknowledge that, if we white people can't acknowledge that, well, then we've got a problem. And Tim, I'm sorry that you can't see it, clearly. Tyrone in Chicago. Hey, Tyrone, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Tom, okay, the day of September the 1st. Now, I want to tell you something. November the 3rd, I made predictions before and I'll be right. November the 3rd, Joe Biden going to get 59% of the vote. He's going to get over 300 electoral votes. Donald Trump going to get 37% of the vote. And the other guy, the third party, I think, going to get 4%. But Biden might even get 60% of the vote. And Tom, one thing I want to ask you something. I don't understand Planned Parenthood. What is that all about? Because they keep saying Obama gave them money to give abortions. Was there any truth to that? That was the right wing always say.
No, not in a way that was any different than anything before. Planned Parenthood segregates their abortion services, which is less than 1% of what they do, from the regular clinics where they offer gynecological help and birth control pills and family planning counseling and all that kind of stuff. And the federal government will reimburse states and whatnot for people using Planned Parenthood's birth control clinics, but does not reimburse them for their abortion clinics. And that's why they segregate the two. And that's the result of an amendment to an appropriations bill that Henry Hyde put into place back in the 1970s, as I recall, after the Roe v. Wade decision. And it's been law ever since. So it would be against the law for Barack Obama or for anybody else to have given Planned Parenthood money for abortion services, Tyrone, regardless of what Trump and the right-wingers are going to say. So, that's the situation. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news. Well, actually, last 15 minutes of the show here. We'll pick up your calls and see where we go. New headline, this over at rawstory.com. White vigilante couple shoots at black men who were simply returning a U-Haul truck. It never ends.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
15 minutes before the hour. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Gregory in Ventura, California. Hey, Gregory, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I don't understand how Reagan, not holding a federal position yet, was able to subterfuge Carter with the Iran situation. I recall like a chopper going down and we couldn't get our hostages out. But what did Reagan pull there? How did he do that?
There's a book by a woman named Barbara Honegger who worked in the Reagan administration. In fact, the back cover of the book is a picture of her with Ronald Reagan on one side and George Herbert Walker Bush on the other side hugging her. She worked in their administration, I believe in the State Department. And the book is called October Surprise, and it lays it out in detail. Basically, in, I don't recall the exact month, it's been 4 or 5 years since I've read the book, but early on in the campaign, Bill Casey, who was Reagan's campaign director, and a guy, as I recall, who was named Nir, N-I-R, maybe M-I-R, went to Paris and met with representatives of the Ayatollah. At that point, the hostages had been seized, but there was strong opposition to holding the hostages inside Iran. Bani Sadr, that's his full last name, his first name is Abul Hassan, as I recall, Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, ran for president of Iran in August and early September of 1980. So this is in the middle of the election. And his campaign platform was free the hostages. He was one of 5 or 6 candidates who ran. You can read an op-ed about this written by Bani Sadr himself in the Christian Science Monitor. If you just Google, Bani, B-A-N-I-SADR, and Christian Science Monitor and Iran or hostages or, any of those words. And he tells the story. He just comes around and tells it. The former president of Iran. He ran. There were 4 or 5 other candidates. They were all running, with one exception. They were all running on a platform of free the hostages, which overwhelming Iranian public support was in favor of. The guys who were holding the hostages were viewed as crackpots and cranks who were hurting the country. Bani Sadr won by 73%. The total vote of people who wanted to free the hostages was over 90%. Again, Bani Sadr tells this story, and you can back it up with the news reports in the time. Bani Sadr then tells the story of how in early September he became president of Iran, and he went to the Ayatollah and said, I just ran on a platform of releasing the hostages. And this was his first discovery of this whole thing, right? I ran on a platform of releasing the hostages. Let's do it. And the Ayatollah said, no, number one, we can't release the hostages because we've got to deal with the Reagan campaign that after the election is over, he's going to ship us weapons, because our entire military is American manufactured. The Ayatollah, the Shah was buying it all from the U.S. And, for the last year, they've been refusing to sell us replacement parts. And so we're going to get all these replacement parts and new missiles and all this stuff. And by the way, we've already received a shipment of tires via Israel from friends of Ronald Reagan's. Boy. So, it's all right there. I lay this out in more detail in my book on the Supreme Court. And the reason why it has something to do with the Supreme Court is that Reagan winning, this whole thing for Reagan winning was set up in part by right-wingers who wanted Reagan to pack the court for them, which he did. And so, but the story is no secret anymore. It's, Gregory, complete with, hot links or source material or whatever, all through the endnotes. You can read the whole sordid story in the hidden history of the U.S. Supreme Court and the betrayal of America. We'll be right back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Latest hidden history books on monopoly and oligarchy, wherever fine books are found. Thom Hartmann here. In my new book, The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, I'll be taking you from the birth of America as a revolt against monopoly, remember the Boston Tea Party, to the largely successful efforts of both Presidents Theodore and Franklin Roosevelt and other like-minded leaders to constrain corporations' monopolistic urges, to the massive changes in the rules of business starting during the Reagan Revolution that have brought us into the cancer stage of capitalism. In the foreword by Ralph Nader, he says, "This is the most important dynamic book on the cancers of monopoly by giant corporations written in our generation." End quote. It's the 4th in my Hidden History series, available where all fine books are sold. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. Democracy starts with you. Tag, you're it. Oh, welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jimmy in Texarkana, Arkansas. Hey, Jimmy, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yes. Tom, the next best thing to seeing Biden win the presidency, which I hope he does, is seeing Trump have to deal with a Democratic House and Senate. That would be fun to watch. But definitely Biden would be the preference. Well, what do you think about that?
I think you're right, Jimmy, and I think that if Trump wins the election by rigging the Electoral College vote, whether it's through the 12th Amendment or whether it's through whatever, the odds are still fairly strong that Democrats take the Senate. And if Democrats take the Senate, then I think you're going to see Donald Trump. Well, actually, he might not be removed from office even then, because it'll take a 2/3 vote in the Senate. That's how they were not able to get out either Andrew Johnson or Bill Clinton. But they could definitely make life miserable for him. On the other hand, if he doesn't win, you got the state attorney general for New York, and you've got the district attorney for New York City, both coming after him with criminal complaints. So he and the Trump crime family are looking at going to prison. So it's going to get real interesting, Jimmy. Thanks for the call. Steve in Noblesville, Indiana. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Not a whole lot, but remind the people that Trump said if he gets back in, he's going to do away with that payroll tax. And
right, and Social Security will be broke by 2023.
Yeah. I need to keep reminding people of that every day.
Yeah, amen, Steve. And Medicare will be badly damaged. Social Security, the Social Security Trust Fund will be broke in 3 years if Donald Trump's promise to do away with the payroll tax is put into place. Renee in St. Louis. Hey, Renee, what's up?
Hi, Tom. It's Renee. I am calling to first of all, my issue is abortion. Okay? Mm-hmm. Until a man can go through the full cycle of being a woman and having to make a decision about whether to have a baby or not have a baby, they need to keep their mouths shut. They need to keep their mouths shut. Planned Parenthood is a very good thing. 97% of what they do is offering other options. They offer other options. Any woman that becomes pregnant and decides that she does not want to have an abortion, she should not have one. If her circumstances are so horrible that she has to make that choice, everybody needs to stop trying to judge her. Now, in reference to the McCluskeys that live in St. Louis, I live around the corner. I was raised around the corner from those McCluskeys. They do not live in St. Louis or the suburbs. They live in the central West End. It is an older part of the city. Was a gated community part of the city. Okay, and those people are bad people. Simple, cut and dry. That's what I got. Well,
they certainly have a bizarre history. I mean, the local synagogue, which backs up to the
wife of the gentleman that was killed at the Lee's Pond and Jewelry. Okay, it's already been stated by the man's children he was not a Trumper. Didn't believe in it.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Trump is a sociopath. If you know he's a sociopath, then you should treat him as such, and all of the other sociopaths that empower him.
I am with you. Renee, thank you. Very, very well said. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Yeah, Tom, I want to talk about this 17-year-old, what's his name, Rittenhouse?
Rittenhouse, yeah.
Okay. So the problem here is with his attorney's argument that this is part of the Second Amendment, that he's part of a well-regulated militia. That applied to the states. So, in other words, if he wants to make that argument, he makes it even worse for himself, because the only way he could argue was that this young person was a member of the Illinois state militia, which means as an Illinois state militiaman, he went in and committed murder in the state of Wisconsin and then crossed back over state lines. This makes
That's something George Washington would not have tolerated.
That's a federal murder. That's one state. First of all, it's federal murder. It's because he crossed over state lines and then came back to seek refuge. He went over and back state lines where he committed murder in another state. And if he's claiming that he's a member of the Illinois state militia, then that's the state of Illinois assaulting the state of Wisconsin. That's even worse.
Well, I'm wondering if he's guilty of a federal murder charge, crossing state lines in order to kill somebody. Where's Bill Barr? Where's the Justice Department? Why has he not been federally arrested and charged the way that, for example, Tim McVeigh was?
That's exactly what I'm getting at, is that he has murder charges in the state of Wisconsin that would be heard in the Wisconsin state courts, and also the federal murder charge.
Yeah, but the federal murder charge doesn't seem to be happening. And Donald Trump, is refusing to condemn this guy, which is amazing. Paul, thank you for the call. Very well said. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. I believe Congressman Mark Pocan will be with us for our first hour, Middays with Mark, and, we'll be rolling along. So stay tuned. In the meantime, tell your friends about how to find this program and other great progressive programming. We're here, and there's a bunch of us. Spread the word. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are Omaha Steaks, gourmet you can trust. More information at omahasteaks.com, code TOM. CB Distillery, CBD for sleeping. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. The Clean Phone Pro, phone sanitizer and charger. More info at thenewdealshop.com. Plexiderm Wrinkle Reducer, real science, real results. More info at plexiderm.com, code TOM. ExpressVPN, the VPN that just works. More information at expressvpn.com/Tom. And TEEF, TEEF, Smarter Pet Dental Health. For more information, teef.com, code TOM.
We say fight back!